12 June 1914. Massacre of Phocaea. Massacre of Phocaea occurred in June 1914, as part of the ethnic cleansing policies of the Ottoman Empire that included exile, massacre and deportations. It was perpetrated by irregular Turkish bands against the predominantly ethnic Greek town of Phocea, modern Foça, in the east coast of the Aegean Sea. The massacre was part of a wider anti-Greek campaign of genocide launched by the Young Turk Ottoman authorities, which included boycott, intimidation, forced deportations and mass killings, and was one of the worst attacks during the summer of 1914. June 12, 1964. Nelson Mandela is sentenced to life. Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela was a South African anti-apartheid revolutionary and political leader who served as the first president of South Africa from 1994 to 1999. He was the country's first black head of state and the first elected in a fully representative democratic election. His government focused on dismantling the legacy of apartheid by tackling institutionalized racism and fostering racial reconciliation. Ideologically an African nationalist and socialist, he served as the president of the African National Congress (ANC) party from 1991 to 1997. Although initially committed to nonviolent protest, in association with the SASPI co-founded the militant Umkhonto we Sizwe in 1961 and led a sabotage campaign against the government. He was arrested and imprisoned in 1962, and, following the Rivonia trial, was sentenced to life imprisonment for conspiring to overthrow the state. Mandela served 27 years in prison, split between Robben Island, Pollsmoor Prison, and Victor Verster Prison. Amid growing domestic and international pressure and fears of racial civil war, President F.W. de Klerk released him in 1990. June 12, 1990, Russia Day. Russia Day, called Day of Adoption of the Declaration of State Sovereignty of RSFSR before 2002, is the national holiday of the Russian Federation. It has been celebrated annually on 12 June since 1992. The day commemorates the adoption of the Declaration of State Sovereignty of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, RSFSR, on June 12, 1990. The passage of this declaration by the First Congress of People's Deputies marked the beginning of constitutional reform in the Russian Soviet state. According to some surveys, many Russians think that this holiday is Russia's Independence Day, but the holiday has never had such a name in official documents. According to the survey of Levada Center in May 2003, 65% of the respondents named the holiday as the Independence Day of Russia. June 12, 1991, Kakadichkalai Massacre. On June 12, 1991, 152 minority Sri Lankan Tamil civilians were massacred by members of the Sri Lankan military in the village Kakadichkalai near the eastern province town of Batticaloa. The Sri Lankan government instituted a presidential commission to investigate the massacre. The commission found the commanding officer negligent in controlling his troops and recommended that he be removed from office, and identified 19 other members of the Sri Lankan military to be responsible for mass murder. Batticaloa district forms part of the eastern province of Sri Lanka. Within the Batticaloa district, during the late 1980s and early 1990s, a total of 1,100 civilians were disappeared and assumed killed. In the cluster of villages around Kakadikalai there were two notable massacres, one in 1987 and the 1991 incident. According to UTHR, the number of victims according to leading local citizens following a house-to-house check, 67 bodies were identified and buried and a further 56 were missing, a total of 123. Most of the missing persons are presumed dead and cannot be identified, because like the 17 burnt in the mine crater, they had been mostly burnt to ashes. The rice mill had the largest number of bodies, 43, although the police maintained that only 32 were killed. The locals also reported that at least 6 women, including 2 sisters, were raped, and despite the police denials, this was confirmed privately by medical officials. A military tribunal found the commanding officer guilty of failure to control his troops and illegal disposal of the bodies, and he was dismissed from service. The other 19 soldiers under trial were acquitted but nevertheless sent to the front lines, in the north of the country as a punishment. June 12, 2017, American student Otto Warmbier returns home in a coma after spending 17 months in a North Korean prison and dies a week later. Otto Frederick Warmbier was an American college student who was imprisoned in North Korea in 2016 on a charge of subversion. In June 2017, he was released by North Korea in a vegetative state and died soon afterward. Warmbier entered North Korea as part of a guided tour group on December 29, 2015. On January 2, 2016, he was arrested at Pyongyang International Airport while awaiting departure from the country. He was convicted of attempting to steal a propaganda poster from his hotel, for which he was sentenced to 15 years of imprisonment with hard labor. Shortly after his sentencing in March 2016, Warmbier suffered a severe neurological injury from an unconfirmed cause and fell into a coma, which lasted until his death. North Korean authorities did not disclose his medical condition until June 2017, when they announced he had fallen into a coma as a result of botulism and a sleeping pill. He was freed later that month, still in a comatose state after 17 months in captivity. He was repatriated to the United States and arrived in Cincinnati, Ohio, on June 13, 2017. He was taken to the University of Cincinnati Medical Center for immediate evaluation and treatment. Warmbier never regained consciousness and died on June 19, 2017, 6 days after his return to the United States when his parents requested his feeding tube be removed. A coroner's report stated that he died from an unknown injury causing lack of oxygen to the brain. Non-invasive internal scans did not find any signs of fractures to his skull. In 2018, a U.S. federal court found the North Korean government liable for Warmbier's torture and death, in a default judgment in favor of Warmbier's parents after North Korea did not contest the case. In 2019, U.S. President Donald Trump caused controversy after saying that he believed the word of North Korean leader Kim Jong Un that Kim was not responsible for Warmbier's death. In response, Warmbier's parents criticized Trump for making excuses for Kim and his evil regime. June 12, 2018. North Korea-United States-Singapore Summit. 2018 North Korea-United States-Singapore Summit, commonly known as the Singapore Summit, was a summit meeting between North Korean Chairman Kim Jong Un and U.S. President Donald Trump, held at the Capella Hotel, Sentosa, Singapore, on June 12, 2018. It was the first-ever meeting between leaders of North Korea and the United States. They signed a joint statement, agreeing to security guarantees for North Korea, new peaceful relations, the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, recovery of soldiers' remains, and follow-up negotiations between high-level officials. Both leaders also met separately with Singaporean Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong. Immediately following the summit, President Trump announced that the U.S. military would discontinue provocative joint military exercises with South Korea and stated that he wished to bring the U.S. soldiers back home at some point. But he reinforced that it was not part of the Singapore equation.